The small town of Millfield had never seen a crime so calculated, so methodical, or so deeply disturbing. In September 2018, the death of 34-year-old inmate Marcus Reynolds at Millfield Correctional Facility was initially ruled as natural causes, a tragic but unremarkable event in a place where death was no stranger. But as investigators would later discover, nothing about Reynolds' death was natural. Instead, it was the final act in a chilling scheme orchestrated by one of the facility's most trusted officers, a woman desperate for motherhood and willing to kill to protect her secret. Jessica Winters, 32, had worked at Millfield Correctional Facility for 7 years. Colleagues described her as professional, dedicated, and by all appearances, happily married to her husband of 9 years, Robert Winters. But beneath the surface of her seemingly ordinary life lay a web of disappointment, desperation, and ultimately, deadly calculation. When we look at cases like this, we often search for the obvious red flags, explains Dr. Eleanor Hughes, forensic psychologist. But Jessica Winters didn't fit the profile we typically associate with murderers. She had no prior criminal record, was well regarded at work, and maintained what appeared to be a stable home life. This case demonstrates how personal desperation can drive seemingly ordinary people to commit extraordinary crime. The story of how a correctional officer plotted to use an inmate to fulfill her desperate desire for motherhood and then poison him to cover her tracks reveals the dangerous lengths to which human beings will go when driven by obsession and fear of discovery. Jessica Winters had all the trappings of a successful life: a steady job with benefits and retirement, a 2-story home in a quiet neighborhood, a marriage that, from the outside, seemed solid and loving. But behind closed doors, Jessica's marriage was crumbling under the weight of unfulfilled dreams. Since their wedding day in 2009, Jessica had yearned for motherhood. Former classmates recall her talking about wanting at least 3 children even back in high school. But after years of trying to conceive naturally, the Winters had received devastating news. Robert was infertile. The diagnosis sent shockwaves through their marriage. Robert refused to consider alternatives like adoption or sperm donation, said Carla Mendez, Jessica's longtime friend. He viewed his infertility as a personal failure and couldn't bear the thought of raising another man's child, as he put it. But Jessica couldn't let go of her dream to be a mother. According to friends, Jessica and Robert's marriage had devolved into a cold arrangement by 2017. They still lived together, still presented as a couple to the outside world, but emotional intimacy had long since evaporated. Jessica had privately begun exploring options for having a child on her own, researching sperm banks and considering the possibility of concealing an artificial insemination from her husband. But Jessica knew that Robert would notice if she suddenly became pregnant after years of infertility. She needed a plan, one that would allow her to fulfill her desperate desire for motherhood while providing a plausible explanation for her husband. It was this desperate mindset that led Jessica to consider an unthinkable solution. Marcus Reynolds arrived at Millfield Correctional Facility in January 2018 to serve a 5-year sentence for nonviolent drug offenses. At 34, Reynolds was known among both inmates and staff as charismatic and well-mannered. Unlike many of the facility's residents, Reynolds had completed some college before his legal troubles and was often found reading in the prison library during his free time. Marcus wasn't your typical inmate, recalled Officer Thomas Caldwell, who had worked alongside Jessica Winters. He was respectful, kept his head down, and seemed genuinely interested in rehabilitating himself. He had plans for when he got out, wanted to finish his degree and work with at-risk youth. But Officer Caldwell and others didn't know was that Jessica had taken special notice of Reynolds. Security footage later reviewed by investigators showed that beginning in February 2018, she had begun finding reasons to be stationed near Reynolds' cell block. By March, she had arranged to be the supervising officer during his kitchen duty shifts. Jessica's plan was beginning to take shape. In Reynolds, she saw not just an attractive man who might be susceptible to her advances, but someone who would be unable to claim paternity rights once she achieved her goal: pregnancy. As an inmate serving time, Reynolds would have limited credibility and restricted access to legal resources. He was, in Jessica's calculating mind, the perfect candidate to father her child. What investigators would later determine was that Jessica had spent weeks observing Reynolds, learning his routine and identifying opportunities for private interaction. She had begun leaving small favors for him: extra desserts from the cafeteria, magazines that weren't typically available to inmates, additional minutes on the recreation yard. These seemingly minor kindnesses were the first steps in her manipulation. She was grooming him, explained Detective Sarah Martinez, who led the investigation. Jessica was in a position of power, and she was deliberately using that power to establish a foundation of trust and gratitude that she could later exploit. This wasn't impulsive, it was calculated. By April 2018, Jessica had managed to create opportunities for brief, private conversations with Reynolds. Security camera footage from this period shows multiple instances where Jessica would stop by Reynolds' workstation in the kitchen when other officers weren't present. Though the cameras didn't capture audio, body language analysis performed by experts during the investigation suggested growing familiarity and flirtation. What Jessica couldn't have anticipated was how quickly her plan would progress, or how deeply she would become emotionally entangled with the man she had selected merely as a means to an end. The first physical encounter between Jessica Winters and Marcus Reynolds occurred in late April 2018 in a storage closet adjacent to the kitchen. Jessica had manufactured a reason for Reynolds to help her inventory cleaning supplies, ensuring they would be alone for at least 15 minutes. What began as calculated seduction quickly evolved into a genuine connection. Based on the evidence we've gathered, including Jessica's own journal entries that were later discovered, it appears that she developed real feelings for Reynolds, which complicated her original plan, said Detective Martinez. She wrote about his intelligence, his sense of humor, how different he was from her husband. What had started as a scheme to get pregnant became a genuine affair. Throughout May and June, Jessica and Reynolds found increasingly risky opportunities to meet privately. She would assign him to remote maintenance tasks, volunteer for overnight shifts, and manipulate duty rosters to ensure they could steal moments together. Security blind spots within the facility, areas where cameras weren't present or functional, became their rendezvous points. By July, Jessica had achieved her primary objective. She was pregnant. A home pregnancy test, later found in her personal belongings, was dated July 17, 2018. According to her journal, she had immediately begun preparing to tell her husband, crafting a story about a miracle pregnancy after years of trying. But something unexpected had happened. Jessica's journal entries revealed that she had fallen in love with Reynolds. What's more, he had fallen in love with her. Their relationship had transformed from Jessica's calculated manipulation into something neither had anticipated, a genuine emotional connection. She wrote about their plans for after his release, Detective Martinez recounted. Reynolds had 3 more years to serve, but Jessica wrote about waiting for him, about introducing him to their child once he was free. She fantasized about leaving her husband and starting a new life with Reynolds. This emotional entanglement created a dangerous complication. Jessica had achieved her goal of pregnancy, but now faced the risk that Reynolds would eventually want to claim his parental rights. The child that was meant to fulfill her maternal desires had now become evidence of her professional misconduct and marital infidelity. And Reynolds, believing that their relationship was genuine, had begun making plans that Jessica never intended to fulfill. August 2018 marked a turning point. Jessica's journal entries from this period, later discovered in a locked drawer of her home desk, reveal her growing panic. Reynolds had begun talking about their future together more concretely. He had written letters, never sent but discovered in his cell, expressing his love for Jessica and his excitement about their child. "I want to be a father to our baby," he had written in one unsent letter. "I know I made mistakes before, but this is my chance to do right. I'll be the best dad, I promise. Just 3 more years and we can be a family." Jessica's pregnancy, meanwhile, was progressing. She had successfully convinced her husband that they had experienced a miracle conception. Robert, though initially skeptical, had embraced the news with a joy that Jessica hadn't seen in years. Her journal entries describe his renewed attention, how he had begun renovating their spare bedroom into a nursery, how he spoke excitedly about names and future plans. The life Jessica had originally wanted seemed suddenly within reach: a child, a stable marriage, financial security. But Reynolds now represented a threat to that vision. If he ever revealed their relationship or claimed paternity, she would lose everything: her marriage, her job, possibly even custody of her child. "The entries from mid-August show Jessica wrestling with her options," said Dr. Hughes. She considered requesting a transfer to another facility but feared that would raise suspicions. She thought about coming clean to her husband, but knew that would end her marriage. In her mind, she was trapped, and Reynolds was the source of that trap. On August 24, 2018, Jessica's journal contains the first mention of what would eventually become murder. "I can't risk everything for him. There has to be a way to make sure he never tells anyone. Something that looks natural, something that can't be traced back to me. The entry marks the moment when Jessica began researching poisons. Jessica's internet search history, later recovered by digital forensics experts, revealed extensive research into untraceable poisons beginning in late August 2018. She had searched for natural poisons, poisons that mimic heart attack, and how to extract toxins from plants. She had visited websites discussing the properties of various toxic plants and chemicals, paying particular attention to those that break down quickly in the human body. What makes this case particularly disturbing is the level of premeditation, said prosecutor James Wilson during the trial. This wasn't a crime of passion or a momentary lapse in judgment. Jessica Winters spent weeks researching the perfect poison, learning how to obtain and administer it, and planning how to avoid detection. Jessica eventually settled on a compound derived from oleander, a common ornamental plant known for its toxicity. All parts of the oleander plant contain toxic cardiac glycosides that can cause fatal heart arrhythmias when ingested. Importantly for Jessica's purposes, the symptoms can resemble a natural heart attack, particularly in cases where the victim has no prior cardiac history. Security footage from September 1, 2018 shows Jessica leaving work with a small bag from the facility's garden program, where oleander was grown as part of the landscaping. 3 days later, credit card records show she purchased a small food dehydrator from a local department store. She was methodically gathering what she needed to create an untraceable poison, explained forensic toxicologist Dr. Rebecca Lang. By drying and crushing the oleander leaves, she could create a powder that could easily be mixed into food or drink. The cardiac glycosides would trigger heart failure that, without specific testing, might be attributed to natural causes. Jessica's planning extended to selecting the perfect moment to administer the poison. Reynolds had mentioned to her that he had occasional headaches, for which he would request over-the-counter pain relievers from the medical staff. Jessica, as a trusted officer, had the authority to deliver such medications to inmates. By mid-September, Jessica had everything in place. Her journal entry from September 15 reads simply, "It's prepared. I'll bring it tomorrow. This ends now." On September 16, 2018, security cameras at Millfield Correctional Facility captured Jessica Winters reporting for her shift at 7:32 a.m. She was carrying her usual lunch bag, later determined to contain not only her meal, but a small vial of oleana extract mixed with powdered acetaminophen, designed to look identical to the over-the-counter pain medication regularly dispensed to inmates. At 10:14 a.m., Reynolds requested medication for a headache through the facility's medical request system. The request was routine, and as was standard procedure, the medical staff prepared a single dose of acetaminophen to be delivered to him. Jessica, who had positioned herself near the medical station, volunteered to deliver the medication. What the medical staff didn't know was that Jessica had already prepared an identical-looking but lethal substitute, Detective Martinez explained. She took the legitimate medication from the medical station, but what she delivered to Reynolds was the oleander poison she had prepared. Security footage shows Jessica approaching Reynolds' cell at 10:23 a.m. The exchange appears entirely normal, a correctional officer delivering approved medication to an inmate. Reynolds can be seen accepting what he believed was standard pain medication with a cup of water. Within the hour, the poison would begin its work. At 11:47 a.m., Reynolds' cellmate activated the emergency call button. Reynolds was experiencing severe nausea, dizziness, and chest pain, early symptoms of oleander poisoning. By the time medical staff arrived, Reynolds was struggling to breathe, his heart racing with an irregular rhythm. The initial assessment by the prison medical team was that Reynolds was experiencing a cardiac event, said Dr. Michael Chen, who was part of the medical response team. Given that he was a 34-year-old man with no prior cardiac history, it was unusual but not impossible. We administered immediate transfer to Millfield General Hospital. Security footage captures Jessica Winters watching from a distance as Reynolds was wheeled out on a gurney, his skin ashen, oxygen mask over his face. Her expression, later analyzed by body language experts for the prosecution, showed no signs of distress or concern, only what they described as studied neutrality. Marcus Reynolds was pronounced dead at Millfield General Hospital at 2:18 p.m. on September 16, 2018. The initial cause of death was recorded as cardiac arrest of unknown origin. Without specific reason to suspect poisoning, the standard toxicology panel performed during autopsy did not test for the cardiac glycosides found in oleander. Jessica's journal entry that evening was chillingly brief. "It's done. He never suffered much. I can move forward now." For several weeks, the death of Marcus Reynolds remained classified as natural causes. Jessica Winters continued her duties at the correctional facility, now visibly pregnant and receiving congratulations from colleagues. Her husband, Robert, had fully embraced his impending fatherhood, telling friends and family about the miracle baby they had conceived after years of trying. The first thread that began to unravel Jessica's carefully constructed plan came from an unexpected source: Reynolds' cellmate, Darren Wright. Something wasn't right about how Reynolds died. Wright told investigators when they finally interviewed him. He was healthy, never had heart problems, but the main thing was he had been talking about his future. He was excited about something, said his life was going to change when he got out. That doesn't sound like someone who's about to drop dead. Wright's statement might have been dismissed as the speculation of an inmate, but it coincided with another development. During a routine review of Reynolds' personal effects before they were released to his family, a correctional officer discovered a small notebook hidden inside the binding of a book. The notebook contained encoded entries that, once deciphered, detailed Reynolds' relationship with Jessica. Though he never mentioned her by name, he referred to her as Jay and described their encounters, their growing relationship, and, most significantly, the child they were expecting together. The discovery of the notebook was the turning point in the investigation, said Detective Martinez. Suddenly, Reynolds' death wasn't just an unfortunate medical event, it was potentially connected to a completely inappropriate relationship between an officer and an inmate. Investigators began reviewing months of security footage, tracking Jessica's movements and interactions with Reynolds. They noted the increasing frequency of their contact, the unusual assignments that placed them in proximity, and the private conversations that shouldn't have been occurring. When confronted with the initial evidence, Jessica maintained her innocence, claiming that Reynolds had developed an obsession with her and had fabricated their relationship in his writings. But as the investigation deepened, more damning evidence emerged. Digital forensics experts recovered Jessica's deleted internet search history, revealing her extensive research into untraceable poisons. A search of her home uncovered the food dehydrator with traces of oleander residue, as well as her hidden journal detailing the entire scheme from conception to execution. The journal was the smoking gun, Prosecutor Wilson explained. It provided a day-by-day account of her plot, from the initial plan to get pregnant to her decision to murder Reynolds when he became a liability. The level of detail and calculation it revealed was nothing short of chilling. Armed with this new evidence, investigators ordered a more comprehensive toxicology screening of preserved samples from Reynolds' autopsy. The results confirmed the presence of oleander-derived cardiac glycosides at levels sufficient to cause fatal heart arrhythmia. On November 28, 2018, Jessica Winters was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. Jessica's arrest sent shockwaves through Millfield. Local news coverage described the community's disbelief that a trusted correctional officer could commit such a calculated crime. Her colleagues expressed stunned betrayal, many unable to reconcile the professional woman they knew with the cold-blooded murderess described in court documents. Robert Winters, now confronted with the truth about his wife and the child she was carrying, filed for divorce immediately. Court records indicate he sought no parental rights to the unborn child, stating in his filing that the circumstances of conception represent an unforgivable betrayal. Jessica gave birth while in custody awaiting trial, delivering a healthy baby boy in February 2019. The child was placed with Jessica's sister, who was granted temporary custody pending the outcome of the trial. The trial of Jessica Winters began in May 2019 and lasted 3 weeks. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence, including the journal, digital forensics, physical evidence of the poison production, and security footage documenting the delivery of the fatal dose. "This case represents one of the most calculating murders I've prosecuted," said Wilson during closing arguments. Jessica Winters used her position of authority to manipulate an inmate for her personal benefit, developed a relationship that was both unethical and illegal, and when that relationship threatened her plans, she coldly eliminated the threat. This wasn't a crime of passion. It was an execution designed to preserve her deception. Jessica's defense attempted to portray her as a woman pushed to extremes by her desperate desire for motherhood, arguing for a reduced charge of manslaughter due to extreme emotional distress. They presented expert testimony about the psychological impact of infertility and the desperate measures some women might contemplate when denied motherhood. But the evidence of premeditation was too substantial to overcome. The jury deliberated for just 7 hours before returning a guilty verdict on the charge of first-degree murder. In July 2019, Jessica Winters was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. In delivering the sentence, Judge Caroline Reeves addressed Jessica directly. "You abused your position of authority, engaged in an inappropriate relationship with an inmate, and when that relationship threatened to expose your deception, you ended a human life with calculating precision. The planning and execution of this crime demonstrate a chilling disconnection from the value of human life. The sentence of this court reflects both the premeditated nature of your actions and the betrayal of the public trust your position represented." Today, Marcus Reynolds' family continues to grapple with not just his loss, but the circumstances surrounding his death. His mother, Elaine Reynolds, has become an advocate for greater oversight in correctional facilities, particularly regarding officer-inmate interactions. "My son made mistakes in his life, but he was serving his time and had plans to turn things around," she told reporters after the trial. "Instead, he was manipulated by someone with power over him, used to fulfill her desires, and then discarded when he became inconvenient. The system failed to protect him." The case prompted Millfield Correctional Facility to implement sweeping reforms, including increased camera coverage to eliminate security blind spots, stricter supervision of officer-inmate interactions, and enhanced psychological screening for correctional staff. Jessica's child, now 6 years old, remains in the custody of Jessica's sister. Court records indicate that the child has no contact with either biological parent. Jessica because of her life sentence, and Reynolds' family because of the painful circumstances surrounding his conception and the murder of his father. As for Jessica Winters, prison records indicate she has maintained her innocence despite the overwhelming evidence against her. She has filed multiple appeals, all of which have been denied. Those who have interviewed her report that she expresses no remorse for Reynolds' death, maintaining that her actions were necessary to protect her child's future. What makes this case so disturbing is not just the murder itself, but what it reveals about human nature, reflects Dr. Hughes. Jessica Winters wasn't a career criminal or someone with antisocial tendencies. She was an ordinary woman who, when faced with the potential loss of something she desperately wanted, made a series of increasingly terrible choices that culminated in murder. It reminds us that under certain circumstances, ordinary people can commit extraordinary evil. The case of Jessica Winters serves as a stark reminder of the dangers of obsession, the abuse of power, and the devastating consequences that can result when someone decides that another human life is an acceptable price to pay for personal desire. In the quiet town of Millfield, the ripples of her actions continue to be felt, a somber legacy of one woman's deadly determination to create the family she wanted, regardless of the cost. The affluent neighborhood of Oakwood Heights had never witnessed a crime so brutal or a betrayal so profound. On the night of March 15, 2022, paramedics responded to a frantic 911 call from 36-year-old Margaret Maggie Palmer, a respected nurse at Mercy General Hospital. The call brought them to a scene of horrific violence, a luxury home in disarray, the body of 42-year-old investment banker James Palmer lying in a pool of blood in the master bedroom, and a seemingly traumatized wife, with defensive wounds claiming she had fought off an intruder who had murdered her husband. But as investigators would soon discover, the home invasion story was an elaborate fiction. The truth was far more calculated, a murder-for-hire plot orchestrated by a wife desperate for financial freedom, who then attempted to eliminate the only witness to her crime. The subsequent investigation would reveal a conspiracy involving a prison connection, a deadly partnership, and a double cross that ultimately led to the unraveling of Maggie Palmer's carefully constructed plan. This case stands out for its layers of deception, explains Detective Marcus Rodriguez, lead investigator on the Palmer case. "We had a respected medical professional who was willing not only to have her husband killed for financial gain, but who then tried to eliminate her accomplice to complete her cover story. The premeditation involved was chilling. What began as a seemingly random act of violence in an upscale neighborhood would evolve into a story of greed, opportunity, and a deadly miscalculation that would eventually bring two killers to justice." To those who knew them, Maggie and James Palmer epitomized success. Their 4,200-square-foot home in Oakwood Heights featured an in-ground pool, meticulously maintained gardens, and an interior that could have graced the pages of architectural magazines. James drove a luxury German sedan, while Maggie preferred her white Range Rover. They vacationed in exotic locations twice yearly and were fixtures at local charity events. Maggie had worked as a registered nurse at Mercy General for nearly a decade, respected by colleagues for her efficiency and clinical skills. James had built a successful career as an investment banker at Harrington Financial Group, known for working long hours and securing major clients. They seemed like the perfect power couple, recalled Diane Matthews, a neighbor who had lived across the street from the Palmers for 5 years. Always friendly, always put together, Maggie would bring homemade cookies to neighborhood meetings and James would help people with financial advice. You'd never imagine what was happening behind closed doors. What neighbors and colleagues couldn't see was a marriage in steep decline. Financial records examined during the investigation revealed that despite their outward displays of wealth, the Palmers were deeply in debt. James had made several risky investments that had failed to yield returns. Their mortgage was underwater, credit cards were maxed out, and they had taken second and third loans against their property to maintain their lifestyle. More significantly, James had recently increased his life insurance policy to $3,500,000, listing Maggie as the sole beneficiary. The policy, updated just 6 months before his death, included coverage for accidental death and home invasion scenarios. The financial motive was substantial, noted prosecutor Elena Vasquez. The Palmers were effectively bankrupt on paper yet maintaining the facade of success. With James gone, Maggie stood to transform overnight from someone drowning in debt to a multi-millionaire. But financial strain wasn't the only pressure point in the Palmer marriage. Digital forensics would later recover deleted text messages from Maggie's phone, indicating she had been involved in an affair with Dr. Christopher Reed, a cardiologist at Mercy General, for nearly 2 years prior to James's murder. The messages painted a picture of Maggie's growing resentment toward her husband and her dreams of starting a new life with Dr. Reed. In one particularly damning message sent 3 months before the murder, Maggie had written, "Sometimes I wish he would just disappear. We could start fresh with the insurance money." While Dr. Reed was later cleared of any involvement in or knowledge of the murder plot, these messages established Maggie's mindset and motive. She wanted her husband gone, and she wanted the financial freedom to start a new life. What she needed was someone to help make that happen. Maggie Palmer's position as a nurse created numerous opportunities for her to interact with people from all walks of life. But it was her 3-month rotation in 2021 at the medical ward of Westlake Correctional Facility that would provide the connection that would later turn deadly. Nathan Reeves, 29, was serving the final months of a 5-year sentence for armed robbery when he was admitted to the prison medical ward for treatment of a persistent respiratory infection in November 2021. At that time, Maggie was working 3 shifts per week at the facility, providing care to inmates with medical needs. Reeves was not considered a high-risk inmate, explained Corrections Officer Paul Sanderson. He had maintained good behavior during his incarceration, participated in educational programs, and was scheduled for release in January 2022. There was nothing in his prison record that would have flagged him as someone likely to reoffend so quickly after release. Security footage from the prison medical ward, later examined by investigators, showed multiple interactions between Nurse Palmer and Reeves during his 2-week stay in the ward. While the footage didn't capture audio, body language experts noted increasing familiarity between the two. What began as standard patient-nurse interactions evolved into longer conversations, with Maggie often lingering at Reeves' bedside after completing her medical duties. Visitor logs from December 2021 through January 2022 revealed something even more suspicious. Maggie Palmer had visited Nathan Reeves 3 times after he returned to general population, listing herself as a prisoner support volunteer on the visitation forms. These visits were the first red flag, noted Detective Rodriguez. There was no legitimate reason for Palmer to continue contact with Reeves after he left medical care. She wasn't assigned to any official prisoner support role. She created that pretext to establish contact outside the medical ward environment. What investigators would later piece together through cell phone records, witness statements, and eventually Reeves' own testimony was that during these visits, Maggie had begun laying the groundwork for her plan. She had identified Reeves as someone who might be willing to commit a crime for the right price, particularly as he approached his release date with limited job prospects and no financial resources. By the time Reeves was released from Westlake Correctional Facility on January 28, 2022, he and Maggie had established a connection that would remain hidden from authorities until after James Palmer's murder. Reeves left prison with something many released inmates lack: a promise of quick money and a contact willing to help him earn it. The 7 weeks between Nathan Reeves' prison release and James Palmer's murder were filled with careful preparation and increasing contact between Maggie and her future accomplice. Cell phone records showed that Maggie had purchased a prepaid phone 3 days before Reeves' release, which she then used exclusively for communications related to the murder plot. The prepaid phone's location data, later recovered by digital forensics experts, placed Maggie at a roadside diner 30 miles outside the city on February 3, 2022. Security footage from the diner confirmed that she met with Reeves for approximately 47 minutes. According to the server who waited on them, they spoke in hushed tones and stopped talking whenever she approached the table. This meeting appears to be when the murder plan was first seriously discussed, said Detective Rodriguez. Palmer paid cash for both meals, and according to the server's statement, handed Reeves what looked like a small envelope before leaving. We believe this was an initial payment to secure his cooperation. Financial records show that Maggie had withdrawn $5,000 in cash from her personal account the day before this meeting. Similar cash withdrawals totaling $15,000 would follow over the next several weeks, carefully structured to avoid triggering banking reporting requirements. Text messages from the prepaid phone recovered during the investigation revealed the evolution of their plan. Maggie had provided detailed information about James's schedule, the layout of their home, and where valuables were kept, to make the staged home invasion appear credible. She had also supplied Reeves with a copy of the house key and the code to disable their security system. The messages outlined a clear division of responsibilities. Reeves would enter the home on March 15, when James was scheduled to return early from a business trip. Maggie would ensure she had a verifiable alibi by working her normal shift at the hospital, leaving during her dinner break to meet Reeves at the house after he had killed James. Together, they would stage the scene to look like a robbery gone wrong, with Maggie returning to work to finish her shift before discover her husband's body upon arriving home. For his role, Reeves was promised $100,000 from the insurance payout once Maggie received it. The text exchanges make clear that both parties understood the criminal nature of their arrangement, with repeated references to ensuring no evidence was left behind and establishing alibis that would withstand scrutiny. What Reeves couldn't have known was that Maggie had already begun planning the second phase of her scheme, one that would eliminate him as a witness and complete her narrative of being the lone survivor of a home invasion. As February turned to March, the communication between Maggie Palmer and Nathan Reeves intensified. They had agreed on March 15 as the date for the murder, a decision influenced by several factors that Maggie believed would work in their favor. First, James was scheduled to return early from a business trip to Chicago that evening, arriving home around 7:30 p.m. Second, Maggie had arranged to work a 12-hour shift at Mercy General, giving her a solid alibi during the time of the murder. Third, most of their neighbors would be attending a community fundraiser that evening, reducing the likelihood of witnesses. Security footage from a hardware store dated March 10 shows Reeves purchasing items later found at the crime scene: duct tape, plastic zip ties, work gloves, and a crowbar. He paid cash for these items, but failed to notice the store's security cameras, a crucial oversight that would later help connect him to the crime. Meanwhile, Maggie was making her own preparations. Pharmacy records from Mercy General revealed that small amounts of propofol, a powerful sedative used in surgical procedures, had gone missing during several of Maggie's shifts in early March. While initially not enough to trigger a formal investigation, the discrepancies were noted in the hospital's inventory system. The evidence suggests that Palmer was planning to sedate Reeves after the murder, explained forensic toxicologist Dr. Sophia Chen. Propofol would have rendered him unconscious quickly, allowing her to stage the scene as she wanted, including setting him up as the sole perpetrator who she supposedly killed in self-defense. On March 14, the day before the murder, Maggie and Reeves met one final time at a park outside the city limits. A jogger who recognized Maggie from the hospital later reported seeing her engaged in what appeared to be an intense conversation with a man fitting Reeves' description. The witness recalled that Maggie had handed the man an envelope before they parted ways. That same evening, Maggie placed a brief call to James while he was in Chicago, a conversation that was later recovered from James's phone records. The call lasted less than 2 minutes, with Maggie confirming his arrival time the following day and telling him she would see him when she got home from her shift. It would be their final conversation. By the morning of March 15, all pieces of the plan were in place. James Palmer had less than 12 hours to live, and the scheme that would turn a nurse into a murderer was about to unfold. March 15, 2022, began as a normal workday for Maggie Palmer. She arrived at Mercy General Hospital for her 7 a.m. shift, greeted colleagues, and began her rounds caring for patients in the surgical recovery unit. Hospital security footage shows her moving through her day with apparent normalcy, checking vital signs, administering medications, and updating charts. Meanwhile, James Palmer was wrapping up his business in Chicago. His rideshare receipts show he was picked up from his downtown hotel at 3:15 p.m. for his flight, which departed at 5:20 p.m. and landed at 6:45 p.m. Airport security cameras captured him retrieving his luggage and exiting the terminal at 7:05 p.m. His final known movements were recorded by a gas station security camera near their home at 7:28 p.m., where he stopped to purchase a bottle of wine, presumably as a gift from Maggie. According to the timeline established by investigators, James arrived home at approximately 7:40 p.m. He entered an empty house, or so he thought. Cell tower data placed Nathan Reeves' phone in the vicinity of the Palmer residence from 6:30 p.m. onward, suggesting he had arrived early and was waiting inside. The medical examiner's report would later determine that James Palmer died between 7:45 p.m. and 8:15 p.m. from multiple stab wounds to the chest and abdomen. The attack was brutal and efficient, with one wound penetrating his heart and causing rapid death. There were defensive wounds on James's hands and forearms, indicating he had tried to fight off his attacker. The evidence at the scene tells us that James entered the house, likely called out for Maggie, and was ambushed by Reeves in the front hallway, Detective Rodriguez explained. The initial struggle moved from the hallway into the living room, where several items were knocked over, and then into the master bedroom, where James ultimately died. At 8:32 p.m., security footage from Mercy General shows Maggie Palmer signing out for her dinner break. She told colleagues she was going to a nearby restaurant to meet a friend, but her car was tracked by traffic cameras heading in the direction of her home. She arrived at the Palmer residence at approximately 8:50 p.m., by which time James was already dead. What was supposed to happen next, according to the original plan, was that Maggie and Reeves would stage the scene to look like a robbery gone wrong. They would ransack certain areas of the house, take valuables that Maggie would later dispose of, and create evidence suggesting multiple intruders had fled the scene after James interrupted them. Maggie would then return to the hospital to complete her shift, providing her with an alibi and discover her husband's body when she returned home at the end of her workday. But Maggie Palmer had a different plan in mind, one that would eliminate the only person who could connect her to the murder. When Maggie Palmer entered her home that evening, she was carrying not only her regular purse but also a small medical bag, the kind nurses often use to carry personal items and emergency supplies. Inside that bag, investigators would later discover, was a syringe containing propofol stolen from the hospital and a hunting knife from the Palmers' collection of outdoor equipment. The scene that unfolded next had to be reconstructed from physical evidence, as neither participant would initially provide a complete account. What seems clear is that Maggie's arrival triggered the second phase of her plan, the elimination of Nathan Reeves. Based on the evidence, we believe Palmer entered the house and confirmed that her husband was dead, said crime scene analyst Terry Warren. She then attempted to inject Reeves with the propofol, likely suggesting it was part of their plan to avoid leaving evidence. When that failed, either because Reeves refused or because she couldn't administer it effectively, she resorted to her backup plan, attacking him with the knife. The physical evidence supported this reconstruction. Traces of propofol were found on a broken syringe in the kitchen. Blood spatter analysis indicated that a second violent confrontation had occurred there, separate from the attack on James. Most tellingly, investigators found small cuts on Maggie's hands consistent with her grip slipping on the knife handle during a stabbing motion, injuries that wouldn't match her later claim of defending herself from an intruder. What Maggie hadn't counted on was Reeves' survival instinct and physical advantage. Though she managed to inflict a serious wound to his left shoulder, Reeves fought back. The struggle moved from the kitchen through the dining room, overturning furniture and breaking decorative items. Eventually, Reeves managed to escape through the patio doors at the rear of the house, leaving a trail of blood across the backyard and over the fence into the neighboring property. Finding herself alone with one dead body instead of two, Maggie was forced to improvise. The clock was ticking. She needed to return to the hospital soon to maintain her alibi. In approximately 20 minutes, she created a scene to support her new narrative, a home invasion in which she had returned unexpectedly, surprising the intruder who had just killed her husband and fighting for her life before the attacker fled. She overturned additional furniture, broke a window from the inside to suggest the intruder's entry point, despite later evidence showing Reeves had used the key she provided and inflicted several superficial wounds on her own arms and face to support her claim of having fought off the attacker. She then placed the bloody knife in the kitchen sink and called 911 at 9:37 p.m. This is where emotional overlay affected her judgment, explained forensic psychologist Dr. Rachel Kim. In her adrenaline-fueled state, Palmer made several critical errors that an experienced crime scene investigator would immediately recognize as inconsistent with her story. But in her mind, she was creating a plausible scenario that would direct suspicion away from herself. The 911 call, later played in court, captured Maggie's performance as the traumatized wife who had just found her husband murdered and barely escaped with her own life. Her voice shaking, she described returning home to check on her husband during her break and encountering a masked intruder who attacked her before fleeing. The dispatcher instructed her to wait outside for police, who arrived at the scene at 9:42 p.m. First responders found Maggie Palmer sitting on the front steps of her home, her scrubs stained with blood, superficial cuts visible on her arms and face. She appeared to be in shock, responding slowly to questions and repeatedly asking about her husband, despite having already told the 911 dispatcher that he was dead. Inside, the scene was one of apparent chaos. James Palmer lay on the master bedroom floor, surrounded by blood that had soaked into the carpet. Drawers had been pulled out and emptied, valuables scattered across various rooms, and furniture overturned. The broken window in the den suggested a point of entry, while the open patio doors indicated the intruder's escape route. To an untrained eye, it might have looked like a home invasion gone tragically wrong, but to the experienced detectives and crime scene analysts who arrived shortly after, subtle inconsistencies immediately raised questions. The first red flag was the broken window, recalled Detective Rodriguez. Glass fragments were on the outside of the window frame rather than inside where they should have been if someone had broken in. This suggested the window was broken from inside the house, not by someone trying to enter. Other details similarly failed to align with Maggie's story. The home security system had been deactivated using the correct code, not disabled by an intruder. Despite the appearance of ransacking, the intruder had apparently ignored several valuable items in plain sight, including James's expensive watch still on his wrist, and Maggie's jewelry box that appeared disturbed, but with most valuable pieces still present. Most significantly, the blood trail leading from the kitchen through the dining room and out the patio doors told a story different from Maggie's account. The spatter patterns and droplet sizes indicated someone bleeding from a significant wound had moved through the house and fled, rather than an attacker simply escaping after being fought off. While processing the scene, investigators received a call that would dramatically shift the direction of the case. A homeowner 3 blocks away had discovered a wounded man hiding in their garden shed. Police responding to that location found Nathan Reeves, bleeding heavily from a stab wound to his shoulder, and took him into custody. The blood on his clothing would later be confirmed as matching both his own and James Palmer's. Maggie Palmer was transported to Mercy General, where she had been working just hours earlier, for treatment of her injuries and a forensic examination. The superficial nature of her wounds raised further suspicions among medical staff, with one nurse noting in the chart that the cuts appeared controlled and hesitant, inconsistent with defensive wounds typically seen in violent struggles. By dawn on March 16, what had initially been reported as a home invasion murder had evolved into something far more complex. With one potential suspect in custody and growing questions about the supposed victim's story, investigators began the painstaking process of unraveling what had really happened in the Palmer home. While Nathan Reeves was undergoing surgery for his stab wound, detectives executed search warrants for both his apartment and his cell phone records. What they discovered demolished any remaining credibility in Maggie Palmer's home invasion story. Reeves' phone contained dozens of text messages between him and a prepaid number, discussing the murder plan in explicit detail. Investigators quickly traced the prepaid phone to a purchase made by Maggie at a convenience store on January 25. Additionally, in Reeves' apartment, they found an envelope containing $5,000 in cash, with Maggie's fingerprints on both the envelope and several of the bills. The evidence against both of them was overwhelming, said Prosecutor Vasquez. We had communication records, financial transactions, physical evidence connecting Reeves to the crime scene, and a clear motive for Palmer in the form of life insurance and her relationship with Dr. Reed. When confronted with this evidence during his recovery, Reeves made a strategic decision. In exchange for the possibility of avoiding the death penalty, He agreed to provide complete testimony about the murder plot, including Maggie's attempt to kill him afterward. According to Reeves' statement, he had followed the plan exactly as arranged, with Maggie entering the house using the key she had provided and waiting for James to return home. After killing James, he texted Maggie using the code they had established to indicate the job was done. What he wasn't prepared for was her arrival with a syringe and knife. "She told me it was just something to clean up DNA, to wipe away evidence," Reeves told investigators. "Then I saw the needle and knew something was wrong. When I backed away, she came at me with the knife, saying no one could know what happened, that she had to be the only survivor for the insurance to pay out." Reeves' testimony was corroborated by physical evidence, including the propofol residue on the broken syringe and the nature of his stab wound, which forensic analysis determined could not have been self-inflicted. Meanwhile, Maggie Palmer maintained her innocence, repeating her home invasion story even as evidence mounted against her. When presented with the text messages between her prepaid phone and Reeves, she initially claimed the phone must have been stolen or that the messages were fabricated. When confronted with her fingerprints on the cash envelope in Reeves' apartment, she suggested he must have stolen an envelope she had touched. Her story began to collapse entirely when investigators recovered deleted text messages between her and Dr. Reed, including discussions about their future together once she was free from her marriage. While Dr. Reed maintained and evidence supported that he had no knowledge of the murder plot, the messages established Maggie's motive and state of mind leading up to the crime. The final piece of evidence came from Mercy General Hospital's records. An audit of the medication dispensing system showed that propofol had been accessed with Maggie's credentials on multiple occasions when the medication wasn't ordered for any patient under her care. The hospital's security cameras captured her removing items from the dispensing cabinet and placing them in her personal medical bag, the same bag she had with her on the night of the murder. On March 21, 2022, 6 days after James Palmer's murder, Maggie Palmer was formally charged with first-degree murder, attempted murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and insurance fraud. Nathan Reeves faced charges of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder, with prosecutors agreeing to consider his cooperation during sentencing recommendations. The trial of Maggie Palmer began on September 12, 2022, and captivated the public for 3 weeks. Media coverage was extensive, focusing on the contrast between Maggie's professional reputation as a caregiver and the calculated brutality of her crimes. The case was presented by prosecutor Elena Vasquez as a perfect storm of greed, deception, and cold-blooded calculation. The prosecution's case was methodically constructed, beginning with establishing the financial motive through the Palmers' dire financial situation and the recently increased life insurance policy. They then presented the timeline of Maggie's connection to Reeves, from their initial contact at the prison medical ward, through their planning meetings and text exchanges. Nathan Reeves, as part of his plea agreement, provided 3 days of testimony detailing every aspect of the conspiracy. He described how Maggie had first approached him while he was a patient, subtly suggesting that she knew people who could help him make money after his release if he was willing to do something risky. He recounted their planning meetings, the information and resources she had provided him, and finally her betrayal when she attempted to eliminate him as a witness. "I knew what I did was wrong," Reeves testified. "I took a man's life for money, and I'll pay for that for the rest of my life. But she planned everything. She wanted her husband dead. She picked me because she thought I was desperate enough to do it, and then she tried to kill me too so she could play the grieving widow and collect millions." Maggie's defense attorney attempted to portray Reeves as an unreliable witness motivated by self-preservation, suggesting that he had acted alone in killing James and had fabricated Maggie's involvement to reduce his own sentence. This strategy collapsed when prosecutors presented the overwhelming physical and digital evidence connecting Maggie to both the murder plot and the subsequent attempt on Reeves' life. Particularly damaging was the testimony of Dr. Christopher Reed, who confirmed their affair but expressed shock and horror at the suggestion that he had any knowledge of Maggie's plans. Text messages between the two, in which Maggie had alluded to being free, soon and starting a new life with the insurance money, undermined any remaining credibility in her claims of innocence. After just 7 hours of deliberation, the jury returned with guilty verdicts on all counts. On October 10, 2022, Judge William Hargrove sentenced Maggie Palmer to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole for the murder of her husband, plus an additional 25 years for the attempted murder of Nathan Reeves. In his sentencing remarks, Judge Hargrove addressed Maggie directly. "You took an oath as a nurse to do no harm. Yet you orchestrated the death of your husband for financial gain and then attempted to kill your accomplice to cover your tracks. The calculated nature of these crimes and your continued refusal to accept responsibility, even in the face of overwhelming evidence, demonstrate a profound moral corruption that merits the maximum sentence allowed by law. Nathan Reeves, having fulfilled his cooperation agreement with prosecutors, was sentenced to 30 years for his role in James Palmer's murder, with the possibility of parole after serving 20 years. The aftermath of the case brought significant changes to both Mercy General Hospital and Westlake Correctional Facility. The hospital implemented stricter protocols for medication access and accountability, as well as enhanced background checks and psychological screening for medical staff. The prison revised its policies regarding staff-inmate interactions, particularly in medical settings, and implemented additional training for staff to recognize potential manipulation. For the friends and family of James Palmer, the resolution of the case brought closure but little comfort. His parents, who attended every day of the trial, established a scholarship fund in their son's name to support students pursuing financial education. They also became advocates for expanded background checks, for life insurance policies, to help prevent similar crimes motivated by insurance payouts. The most disturbing aspect of this case wasn't just the murder itself, reflected Detective Rodriguez a year after the trial. It was how easily someone in a trusted position, a nurse, a wife, could compartmentalize her life to become a calculating killer. Maggie Palmer spent her days caring for vulnerable patients while simultaneously planning her husband's murder. That kind of psychological disconnect is what makes this case so chilling. Today, the Palmer house stands empty, unable to sell due to its notorious history. Maggie Palmer continues to maintain her innocence and has filed multiple appeals, all of which have been denied. Nathan Reeves serves his sentence at a facility far from where Maggie is incarcerated, having provided what prosecutors described as the full and truthful account that finally brought justice for James Palmer. The case stands as a stark reminder of how the surface appearance of a perfect life can mask deadly intentions, and how a single decision to pursue wealth through violence can destroy multiple lives. In the quiet neighborhood of Oakwood Heights, residents still speak in hushed tones about the night their sense of security was shattered. Not by a random home invasion, but by a calculated betrayal that proved the greatest danger sometimes lies within the apparent safety of one's own home. For more interesting crime stories, check this out.